Guest today is a doctor of chiropractic. He's a doctor of pastoral science. He's an expert in functional nutrition, board certified with the American Clinical Board of Nutrition. He's referred to as the Gluten Free Warrior and is one of the most sought out alternative and nutritional experts in the world. He's also one of the world's leading authorities on gluten sensitivity and lectures nationally to both the public as well as doctors on this and many other nutritionally related topics. He's the founder of the Gluten Free Society and the author of the international best-selling book, No Grain, No Pain, which was printed into 5 languages and turned into a PBS special that aired nationwide. He's been a featured expert in a number of documentaries, including Betrayal, Autoimmune Secrets Revealed, and the Netflix series Afflicted. He's also been on Fox News, CBS, PBS, the New York Post, and many other publications. Our guest is the clinical director of the Origins of Health Care in Sugar Land, Texas. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Peter Osborne. Welcome.
Thanks, Alex. It's great to be here.
Great. I'm going to remove the screen so you and I can just chat one-on-one here, like so. So great to have you. And I read your excellent book a while back after our final in-person conference in 2019. You remember how we used to get together?
Final, wasn't it? With COVID.
We used to get together and see each other in person. Now it's all virtual and digital. So, but great book, great work. And I so much appreciate your efforts. So I know your story. You were in the military. You didn't like how VA was run or what they were doing with the soldiers, and you decided to change things. So I guess we can start there.
Yeah, I worked in the rheumatology department there, and of course the standard of care was drug them until they don't feel pain, and then cut them to replace their joints when the drugs finally failed. And it was in my opinion, a very broken model. And anytime I tried to bring up something different or a different approach, I was kind of kindly dismissed as, oh, that nutrition stuff's not important, right? And so it was all, they try to belittle you. But what I kept coming back to was research, Alex, and I'm a research hound. I mean, I read 15 hours a week, easy. I read more than most people could imagine, right? I mean, I'm just a research hound, and I feel like I have to get smarter and I have to learn more so that I can be a better clinician. I mean, because ultimately I'm beholden to the people that come to see me. I want to be the best I can be for them. And so when I was in the VA hospital, what I kept coming across was research on gluten causing autoimmune disease. And I'm like, we know what causes autoimmune disease. Gluten causes autoimmune disease. Now, at the time, we knew it was a major cause of celiac disease. Celiac disease is an autoimmune disease of the small intestine. Now, I worked in rheumatology. Rheumatology is autoimmune disease of the joints and soft tissues. So things like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, psoriatic arthritis, reactive arthritis. So think of an autoimmune arthritis as an autoimmune disease. A lot of people don't realize that. They don't think it through that way. And so here we were on the precipice. We had this data, this research that said that not only can gluten cause celiac disease, which is autoimmunity, but there's a huge correlation between the quantity of people who have rheumatoid arthritis who improve on a gluten-free diet. And it's because they also had celiac disease. So in the literature, what we found was all these people with celiac disease also went on to develop rheumatoid arthritis. And when you took them gluten-free, not only did their celiac clear, but their joint pain and their joint discomfort and their autoimmune joint problems went away too. And so these were major studies, Alex. This is not like Men's Health, where we're like, here's Men's Health's opinion piece or editorial piece. These were major research studies being published in JAMA, New England Journal, and even the Journal of Rheumatology, which is the primary journal for rheumatologists. And I would bring stacks of this literature to my docs, and I'd say, look, we got to do something different. At least give me 5 people. Let me do a test experiment over here on the side. I'll do whatever I can do. And they threw my research in the garbage and told me to quit digging. So then I went back to the library and I dug out more research because I'm not quitting. Because I mean, at the time, the way I looked at it is I was in grad school and I was paying $250,000 to get an education. And you don't tell me to shut up and not ask questions and not be inquisitive when I'm paying your bills. So like, that was the way I looked at it. And that's why I'm the Gluten Free Warrior, because I'm tenacious. I go after it. And so I came back with more research, and it was now research on fasting. So what we knew is that if you fasted a patient with rheumatoid arthritis, some of the research showed they would get pain relief within less than 48 hours, like dramatic improvements. I'm like, okay, we know that gluten can cause autoimmune disease, and gluten's in food. We know that fasting can reduce autoimmune pain, and fasting is the act of not eating. So you're not putting food in your mouth, right? So like, there's two pieces. So I brought stacks of research on fasting, and I was told stop. And so then I went back to the drawing board one more time. I went back to the library, and I pulled a bunch of research on using high dose fish oil, omega-3, concentrated omega-3, EPA, DHA, because they're anti-inflammatory. And a number of studies were showing that, doses between 4 and 8 grams of omega-3 could actually help resolve pain better than many of the medicines that were being used. I'm like, okay, so we're prescribing fish oil in medicine today. So this is not a stretch. Maybe they'll take this research and do something with it. No, threw it in the garbage, told me to quit. So I did. I quit. I left the hospital, and I started my own private practice. And one of my first patients in private practice was a little girl. She was 9. Her name was Ginger. And Ginger was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis at the age of 2. Her knees were so swollen, she couldn't crawl like the other kids. Like, she was delayed developmentally because of the swelling and the joint damage. So her mom started her on that path to a rheumatologist. From the age of 2, she was on methotrexate, which is a very powerful cancer medicine. It's a chemotherapy drug, but it's a common, it's what's called a DMARD, a disease modifying anti-rheumatic drug. It's used in rheumatology as kind of the mainstay for pain control. But you don't want to ever put a 2-year-old on it. Like, that's ridiculous. But that's what happened in her case. They put her on it from the age of 2 to 7. She was on this cancer medicine. Her gut was totally destroyed. But what really was the travesty here, Alex, was her mom went in, and the rheumatologist looked at her and said, your daughter's got 6 months to live. So here this mom trusted this doctor for 7 years to medicate her child, and the results weren't great. And then at the end of 7 years, the doctor says, we quit, go home and dig a hole. Like, imagine if you're a parent, imagine how you would feel, the trust that you'd put into these people, to these doctors, to do the right thing, to make the good decisions and to help your daughter get better. And then to just say, I quit, we can't do anything more. Like, to me, that's the travesty, because we can do more, and it's in the research, and all you have to do is open your eyes and read it. Damn it. I mean, it's not that hard. I mean, I was, as a graduate student, reading high-level research and applying it, when the doctors that have been in practice for 20 and 30 and 50 years won't even read their own peers' research, right? That's aggravating. That's more than aggravating. In my opinion, it borders on murder, because you're actually, you could say guilt by omission, right? Lack of knowledge is not an excuse. When you're a doctor, you have a higher standard for yourself to learn more, to do more, to be better, so that you can save lives. Otherwise, you're just doing what everyone else is doing, which is following suit with just prescribing drugs, knowing full well that those drugs are not a solution. They're a temporary fix at best, and they don't come without consequences. And one of the things that methotrexate does is it destroys the gut lining. So you have to understand, in autoimmune disease, one of the precursors to the development of autoimmune disease is a process called leaky gut. And leaky gut occurs when the gut is damaged. And so what happens is, basically, very simply, is your poop and all the toxins in it leak into your bloodstream and poison you to death slowly over time. And so that's what methotrexate does, is it allows your poop to leak into your bloodstream, but it suppresses pain. Okay. So within 6 months of changing this little girl's diet, because when her mom brought her to me, the first thing I did is tested her for gluten sensitivity, and she was positive. So we changed her diet. Within 6 months, she was off her medicine. Within 12 months, she was in full remission, and remember, she had 6 months to live, right? So within 12 months, she was in remission with diet change. And today she's gone on to school, graduated high school, graduated college. She's now out there in the world living her life because we changed her diet. And that's the tragedy. That's my background is I knew at that point, I knew my research efforts were accurate. And then I knew clinically, once we applied it, I knew they were even more accurate. And I was really reinforced and emboldened to do more. And that's why I created Gluten Free Society. That's why I founded that foundation, so that people could learn about this. Because in the US, there's 46 million individuals with autoimmune disease, 46 million. And that's an estimation, okay? And it's an underestimation. We know that autoimmune disease is the #1 cause of death in the US. It trumps cancer and heart disease, but the reason you never hear about it is because there's 100 different kinds of autoimmune disease, just like there's 100 different forms of cancer. But when we talk about cancer stats, we say cancer kills 1 million a year, and we clump them all together. We don't clump autoimmune disease together, so it doesn't get the notoriety that it deserves. It doesn't get the research funding that it deserves. It doesn't get any attention, but it is the #1 cause of death in humans in today's world. And, gluten is a major part of that problem. There certainly are other aspects to what cause autoimmune disease, but gluten is a major piece of that. And that's why we founded Gluten Free Society.
I'm going to ask our participants to help me do this interview, and I'm going to give away a copy of this book to the most proactive and the most vocal out of the people here. So if you have a comment or a question, and just throw it into the chat box, and we'll entertain it and discuss it. So, you wrote a whole book on gluten, and gluten's been around for a long time. I mean, as humans, we've been eating for 10,000 years. What did you have to say other than, cut down on the gluten, and the gluten that we have today is genetically modified?
There's a lot more to it than that. So the book's title is not No Gluten, No Pain, right? It's no grain, no pain. And why is there a delineation there? Gluten is the name of a family of proteins. There are hundreds of different types of gluten. And this family of proteins are found in the seeds of grass. So think of the grasses, the different seeds that we have. There's wheat, there's barley, there's rye, there's oats, there's corn, there's rice, there's sorghum, there's millet. These are all grass seeds. And when you eat these grass seeds, you're eating gluten by default. And what we know about gluten is that it is an inducer of autoimmune disease. We know gluten directly can cause leaky gut. We know that we estimate that 40% of the population is gluten sensitive. Now think about that. 1 in 7 Americans have autoimmune disease. 40% of the population is gluten sensitive. So those are big numbers, a lot more than what most people talk about. With celiac disease, they used to say it was like 1 in 10,000. Now they're saying it's like 1%. So the number, even for celiac disease, has climbed dramatically as diagnostics have gotten better.
Do you think it's because of the diagnostics, or because they started genetically modifying our food about 30, 40 years ago?
I don't think it's genetic modification at all.
No, not at all.
No. So understand, we've been genetically hybrid. So first of all, let's define genetic modification. GMO is when you actually add or alter genes of a plant crop. Okay. So for example, there's no such thing as GMO wheat. It doesn't exist. There's hybridized wheat, which is when we take different strains of wheat and we crossbreed them, but we're not altering or manipulating genes. We're just taking qualities like hardy winter wheat, survives really well and does really well. So if we cross that with another type of wheat that is really drought resistant, then we get a hardy wheat that's drought resistant. You see what I'm saying? Like, that's called hybridization.
I get that part, but I know that corn is genetically modified, soy.
Yeah, corn. I said wheat is not genetically modified.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, but I also thought that there was genetic modification in wheat because they sprayed it with Roundup, and
that's different.
That's Roundup ready.
Yeah, that's pesticide application. It's different than genetic manipulation. So, yes, Roundup is used in farming today, and it's used on wheat, but wheat is not a Roundup ready crop. Corn is Roundup ready, sugarcane is Roundup ready, alfalfa can be Roundup ready, beets are Roundup ready. There are different crops that are Roundup ready, meaning they're genetically manipulated so that Roundup doesn't hurt them, but it hurts the weeds, if that makes sense. Whereas wheat is not Roundup ready. But here's why farmers use Roundup on wheat. One, they use it just to kill off the weeds so that the wheat can get an early growth and a fast start. 2, they use it to desiccate the crop. In farming, if you spray with glyphosate, you dry out the crop quicker so that you can combine it. Combining is that big machine that you see on TV if you ever watch those farming shows. And it's that machine that rolls across the grain and it's pulling it up out of the ground and it's separating the grains so that you can store it.
Made by John Deere.
That's right. John Deere is one of the big ones. That's right. The big green tractor. But but that's something that's used as an agent of drying. So it helps dry out the crop so that they can harvest it better. And so, yes, wheat does have Roundup on it, but it is not genetically modified. Now, Roundup is a genetically modified poison. But here's the thing, let's go back in time, because you said we've been eating wheat a long time. So like, I know where you're going with this. I've had this conversation countless times.
Yeah.
We knew that celiac disease, the oldest record medically of celiac disease is 2000 BC. So this is not new. We've known about this. The celiac affliction has been recorded 4,000 years ago. And probably longer. If we had more recorded history, we would probably find it more. So that was before glyphosate. That was before hybridization, genetic manipulation, all those types of things. So this is not new. Now, what we're seeing is we're seeing greater degrees of poisoning of people in modern culture. So think of it like this. You're exposed to gluten and you're gluten sensitive, but you're relatively healthy. So your body just doesn't break down and your body is not just broken because you got a hold of gluten, right? Because your body's adaptive and resilient. All of us are. But imagine now, instead of being healthy, you've been exposed to 30,000 other chemicals. You're eating non-organic food with pesticides in it. You're living in houses with tight sealed systems that have 10,000 more air pollutants in them, right? So you're being exposed to all these things simultaneously. And so your body's resiliency is capped. And so now you're gluten sensitive. And now in America today, this in the history of humans, this has not been true, but it is in America today. More than 50% of total caloric intake is grain.
Really?
Okay. That wasn't true in the past. You have to understand, cereal is only as new as 1895. Cereal was invented post. You guys know the name
Post. As a healthy breakfast, yeah.
Yeah, and why was it invented? So Kellogg, that was a doctor as well. Kellogg, people may not know that about Kellogg cereal company that was founded by two brothers. One of the brothers was a marketer, and the other brother was a medical doctor, and he invented cornflakes to irritate the gut lining of his patients who had constipation. But his brother was a brilliant marketer, so they turned it into health. Right. And so then they built this massive cereal company. And how did they grow that company? In 1943, the United States government banned the sale of grain. They banned the sale of cereals and processed grains. Why? Because they were killing people. They weren't healthy foods. They had very little nutritional value. And they were responsible for about 8,000 deaths a year. Those deaths were in the form of beriberi and pellagra, which are B vitamin deficiency diseases induced by cereal grains. And the research there is very clear. You can go look it up. You can read all about it. But 1943, what happened? The U.S. government passed a law saying if you're going to sell the cereal, you have to add vitamins back to it. So what marketers like Kellogg did is they said, hey, instead of eating us because we kill you, eat more of us because now we're even better for you because we're fortified. So it was the change in the message. I actually have the original commercial, if you will, the print ad. When in 1943, when this change was done, I have that as part of my collection. And that was the message, right? And then what did they do? What did the cereal companies then do? They hired cartoonists to create, cartoons, Sugar Smack Frog, Lucky Tricks, rabbits and leprechauns, and, all kinds of fictional, cartoon characters to market to children. They went so bad. This is how bad it is, Alex. There are research studies that show that if the angle of the eyes of the cartoon character on the cereal box is looking down at 12.5 degrees, it increases trust, psychological trust. I don't remember the exact number, but it's like by 30 or 40%. Crazy, right? Like this is the depth of which they've gone to study us to ensure that we're buying more of their product, knowing that their product is not actually a health food. But my point is this. People don't know that history. That grain and cereal is cereal is a new invention. Using cereal and pimping it out to children in the form of cartoon characters is just as much of a crime as pimping out cigarettes with Joe the Camel. And if you look now in Mexico, this just happened here in the last few weeks. They've banned the use of cartoon characters on their children's cereal because they got wise to it. Because in Mexico right now, diabetes is a massive problem. Obesity is a massive problem because of sugar. And sugar, largely a lot of that sugar is in the form of cereal grains, right? They add all that sugar to all that cereal, and then you have like a double poison that kids are just basically growing up and becoming obese and it's taxing their healthcare system to such a great degree they can't keep going. So they banned the cartoon characters from the boxes.
So Peter, we when I first came to the United States, I was 10 years old, and I don't remember what I ate back in the USSR, but my favorite thing here was Frosted Flakes. And then I found Twinkies, and I found Hostess cakes, and all these excellent foods, and I was fine up until I was 35. But then from 10 to 35, I must have caused enough damage that I started developing an autoimmune condition, psoriatic arthritis specifically. And I think that's the major contributing factor to a lot of people. It's not just the grain that we're eating, it's the way it's processed and the way it's delivered together with sugar, and how much of it we're consuming.
You're absolutely right. It's all of those things. And this is why I didn't call the book No Gluten, No Pain. The grain itself, the way it's processed, is a problem because part of the processing, first, there's a lot of pesticide usage. And even if you buy organic, though, the processing still includes these things. Extrusion is a drying process. So when you dry the carbohydrate in the grain, you form a compound called acrylamide. Acrylamide is a carcinogen, and it's very taxing on the immune system. And that's even found in organic cereal. So again, some people say, well, it's just the pesticide or it's just the glyphosate. It's not. It's the way it's processed. It's the way we handle it. It's the additives that go into it, the dyes, the preservatives, things like BHT, butylated hydroxytoluene, the bromines that we add to the grains as dough conditioners. These are all poisons that are generally recognized as safe according to our own government, right? So our own government has sanctioned the slow poisoning of our own population, just as well as they've sanctioned healthcare for all as a right, but the healthcare they've sanctioned is drug-based, so it doesn't work, right? So like the government sanctioned bad food that made people sick, and then they sanctioned bad medicine that didn't solve people's problems. And so, food manufacturers are making money on the way up, and then drug companies are making money on the way down. And the way it works now is drug companies are now buying the farms. So like if you look at one of the major companies that Bayer, which was a criminal company enterprise during World War II, right? Well, what did they do? They bought Monsanto. They bought it, and that came with all the farming and all the aspects of trademarks and everything else that goes into farming. So now the drug companies are actually getting into the food, and so now this goes back to consumer trust and consumer confidence in the system, but also self-responsibility, personal responsibility to ask the question: how's my food grown? Where does it come from? How's it processed? Is it really food? Is it healthy for me? And do I just listen to this company over here who's owns special interests and has money to gain by my illness? And the answer is obviously, in my opinion, is no. I'm going to move backward here because there was another point I wanted to make about grain in general. So beyond gluten, so there's the gluten aspect of grain, there's the processing of grain, but there's some other things in grain. Grain are heavy in mold, and one of the major issues with grain is something called a mycotoxin. There's a particular family of mycotoxins produced by Aspergillus and Penicillium molds called aflatoxin. Aflatoxin is very dangerous, and it's a major problem if you've ever farmed. You've heard this term, aflatoxin, because it's a major problem in animal feeds. Most animal feeds are grain, by the way, and so these animal feeds can be contaminated with aflatoxin. It was actually responsible for killing a lot of animals. So now we have to be very cautious about that in animal feeds, but grain is a very heavy grower of mold. So a lot of people, when they eat grain, they're getting mold exposure, they're getting mycotoxin exposure. Grain also pulls heavy metal out of the soil. So like your rice particularly is high in lead, it's high in cadmium, it's high in arsenic. And some of that arsenic is because of the pesticides that are used on the soil. So the rice that grows in those soils that they spray all those pesticides, it's now pulling that poisonous arsenic into it. There have been a number of baby food recalls here in the last year or two, and there was just one a few months ago because of heavy metal contamination. And it's not that they're adding metal to it; it's that it's pulling metal from the soil. So there's all these things to think about the way we do things modernly. Now you could say, Dr. Osborne, what if I just grew my grain organically in natural soil, minimally processed, and ate it that way? I would say that's definitely a healthier way to go. And for some people, it would be perfectly fine. But if you are gluten sensitive, and 40% of us are, it's a bad idea. Because gluten as a protein, as a family of proteins, is very difficult to digest. It disrupts the gut lining. And we know this has been studied and confirmed. It causes leaky gut, even in healthy people.
So do you think it's our genetic composition that we are not meant to eat grain, or did some people just adapt to eating it and can eat it for their entire lives and not really exhibit any symptoms?
That's a great question. And I don't know that anyone has the answer to that. I think, here's what I think. I'm a biologist at heart. And so if we think about what is a seed, so that's what grains are. They're seeds, right? They're designed not to be our staple food. Like seeds didn't come into existence to feed us. They're designed to perpetuate their own species. So if you think about biology, in every walk or aspect of life, there's life forms that have the capacity to protect themselves through defense mechanisms, right? And when we talk about humans, we're animate. We can run away, we can fight, we can think. But when you talk about inanimate objects like plants, they don't have feet and legs and mouths. They can yell at you, say, "Don't eat me," right? No. How do they communicate not to eat them? It's through chemical warfare. And if you look at gluten is a chemical. And one of the things that it also does is it shuts down digestion. It actually can inhibit the pancreas from producing digestive enzymes. Why? Because it doesn't want to be digested. Its job is to defend the plant's longevity, but also the plant's perpetuity, right? So like the plant is, once the seed, if you eat it, wants to come out in your poop. It doesn't want to be digested. It wants to come out in your poop because now it's surrounded by fertilizer and it can perpetuate its own species. So now imagine taking those seeds and making them the primary source of calories in everyone's diet. It's quantity. This is where quantity becomes a big factor. There are people with gluten sensitivity, and some are so sensitive that very small quantities can hospitalize them. Some are not that sensitive, but if they consume it in large enough quantities over a large enough period of time, it is a slow poison and it slowly breaks down their ability to cope and adapt to it.
Well, so a lot of the symptomatology that we spoke about, autoimmune conditions, chronic pain, rheumatoid arthritis. What are some of the things that you've seen as a symptom that evolved from gluten sensitivity?
So joint pain, myalgias. So you mentioned rheumatoid arthritis, but there's also polymyalgia, which is a chronic muscular pain disorder. I've seen that very commonly. I've seen neurological disease, cerebellar ataxia, which is a form of vertigo or dizziness where people are dizzy all the time. Neuropathy. So some people with the numbness, the tingling, the pain in their extremities, that's a form of neuropathy. It can be caused by gluten. I've seen it go away in a matter of weeks on gluten-free diets. We've seen autoimmune hepatitis, so autoimmune liver disease. I've seen full recovery with gluten. I've seen one case, not in all cases, but type 1 diabetes, which is an insulin-dependent form of diabetes. It's an autoimmune disease. I've seen one case where an individual was insulin dependent and reversed the damage and was able to get off of insulin. Now, that doesn't happen for everybody, and I don't want to make the claim that everyone with type 1 diabetes is going to heal their diabetes if they go gluten-free. But what I have seen in type 1 diabetes is everybody that I've ever tested with type 1 diabetes was gluten sensitive, hundreds of cases, and every single one of them was able to improve their health and to lower their need for insulin. Okay, so reducing their need. I've seen cases of cancer, lymphoma be caused by gluten and people be able to recover. I've seen cases of Hashimoto's, which is a form of autoimmune thyroid disease, and Graves' disease, which is another form of autoimmune thyroid disease, and Addison's disease, which is an autoimmune disease of the adrenal glands. So I've seen all these types of conditions respond really well with change in diet, particularly with change into a gluten-free and grain-free diet.
That's amazing. And gluten would be on the top of your list. I had a question for you, Dr. Osborne. You worked for the VA, and you would think this was a government agency. And a government agency, we're told, that runs healthcare is supposed to really be looking out for the health of its people. So when someone who is innovative and proactive and interested in nutrition like you came to them with this proactive, cause-oriented approach, you would think that a government agency would be more interested because it's less expensive, it's more effective, but somehow they just rejected you out of hand. I mean, what is happening there? What is the undercurrent? I mean, do you have any idea why that would be?
The undercurrent is that government is in bed with big pharma. I mean, look at the CDC. The CDC has patents on vaccines. The government should never have patents on medicines. Like, the government has no business in being in the private industry of making money off of the sale or being influenced unduly by earning an income off of the sale of any kind of medication, right? I mean, so the government's in bed with pharma. I mean, look at all your politicians. Look who pays for the ads. The number one source of ad revenue for all channels, all mediums, including radio, print mediums and newspaper mediums and TV mediums, is what? Is pharma. Turn the TV on. What do you see? You see 15 pharma commercials, and you get the fast talking guy at the end of the commercial rattling off all the death symptoms, right? All the horrible symptoms. But that's allowed. You have to understand why we have direct to consumer advertising and how this happened. The history is very actually interesting. When big tobacco was under fire, I don't know if you remember that or not. When big tobacco was under fire, the TV channels got with the government and said, "Look, if you crush big tobacco, we're going to lose all of our revenue and we're going to go out of business." So they struck a deal. They struck a deal with big pharma, and they said, if we're going to lose the ad revenue for cigarettes, then we need to get the ad revenue for drugs. We're the only there's only 2 countries in the world that allow direct to consumer advertising.
New Zealand.
Yeah. There should never have been that allowance. There should never have been that allowance, because what it does is it allows marketers to basically to generate such a quantity of dollars on the other end for these companies, and that increases their power and their influence politically, right? And it increases their wealth. And if you're a student of history, you've probably heard this before. Power corrupts absolute. Power corrupts absolutely. I don't care who you are, even myself. I don't want more power, right? I want people to have their own power and be empowered, but I don't want power over others. And when you give entities power over others to influence the nature of the way the government dictates things, I mean, right now, it's very simple to see. The government just passed socialized medicine. They just stole our tax dollars to say that everybody gets medicine, right? But they didn't steal our tax dollars to say everybody gets functional medicine. So like, you try to go get real medicine, which is actual meaningful care, meaningful doctors that actually listen to what you have to say and actually do a physical exam and actually like have a relationship with you. You got to come out of pocket for that. But if you want crap medicine with a 5-minute appointment, a doctor that ignores you and writes you a script and gives you a diagnosis in under 5 minutes, it's free. Who gets rich off that model? The doctor doesn't off that model.
I agree with you 99% on that point, Dr. Osborne. I would say it's not free. It is very, very expensive, because
it's the most expensive.
I have a friend of mine. He runs a company. He pays $33,000 a year to cover his family, with a $2,000 deductible per person. So people spending over $30,000 a year, like $1 million over a working lifetime. It's a fortune, and it's a sham. And I agree with you 100%. The only good medicine is when you work with a doctor directly, and you have their time, their attention, and ultimately their love and care.
Right. I mean, medicine, in my opinion, today is a Ponzi scheme. And it's all the money's just kicked back up to the corporations. You have to understand, most doctors don't do private practice. They're group practice. It's corporations. Yeah. Or they're owned by, the hospitals are owned by corporate. And it's very interesting to see the corporate takeover. It's not interesting, scary rather, because when you go into a hospital, you would expect good care and understanding, and what you really get is you get doc in a box. There's a movie. I don't know if you ever seen the movie. It was written by Mike Judge, the same guy who did the cartoon characters Beavis and Butthead. If you're from that age, right? But the name of the movie is called Idiocracy, and it's a comic, right? It's kind of a satirical piece on what the future could look like if people continue to be drugged down and dumbed down. And one of the scenes is when you go to the hospital and the guy is talking like a street slang. The doctor is talking like street slang because he's not real smart. And they hook a bunch of tubes up to you, and they say, put this one in your butt and put this one in your mouth. And then they're like, oops, sorry, I mixed that up. Put this one in your butt and this one in your mouth. And then the computer gives you an AI diagnosis, right? An artificial intelligence diagnosis. And then, the drug rolls out, spits out. And it's just, again, that's kind of where we're at. Although it's not quite there. It really is. Like, it is on the surface. Like, you don't get care. You get, oh, you have this symptom, therefore you have this disease, therefore you need this drug. And if you stop the doctor and say, well, why do I have these symptoms? What's the origin or the root cause of why these symptoms exist? What is it that I can change and empower myself to do to make something improve? They're going to look at you like you're crazy. And then they're going to give you the stamp, the psych stamp, and they're going to send you over to the psychiatrist, right? And they're going to want to put you on, Paxil or Prozac and basically take away your emotions so that you can't think or feel or ask questions, right? Because the worst thing for most docs is to be questioned because they don't have scientific merit to stand on. It's all smoke and mirrors. A lot of the research that they use is they call it research, follow the research, follow the science. Yeah, let's look at the science. Let's really look at the drug science and let's look at that, because the last real science I looked at on drug medicines was that it was the number one cause of death. According to the British Medical Journal, the number one cause of death, over 300,000 deaths a year, are the number three cause of death, according to that study.
Cancer and heart disease.
Number two was cancer. Number three was the proper prescription drugs, not like people overdosing on heroin on the street, but proper prescription drugs were the third leading cause of death. So if the first two leading causes of death are heart disease and cancer, and the third is the things that we use to treat it, like, that's broken. And anybody can look at that from the outside without bias and say, what are we doing wrong? The problem is it's in the US, it's a $3.7 trillion industry. And when you start questioning that, Alex, people get fired. People's livelihoods go away. If we changed it tomorrow, hospitals would close down. You wouldn't need them. If we changed it tomorrow, you would need a third of the doctors. You wouldn't hardly need any nurses. You wouldn't need any of all the PAs and the NPs and all the techs. That all goes away because people are empowered to take care of themselves. That's an industry that will fight tooth and nail to keep the truth hidden from the average person.
I don't know if you have, but I've come across some medical doctors in my circles, and I've never met more vicious, more angry, more vulgar people in my life. Like, so defensive and so ready to attack and destroy for no reason whatsoever. So it's one of my medical doctors. She's awesome. She calls it a medical cult, and I don't disagree. I've seen that. Look at in today's world. This is not a damnation of medicine either. My grandfather was a medical doctor. I come from that kind of a family background, but he was also a country medical doctor, and he listened to people. And he loved them, and he would exchange a bag of oranges for healthcare. That's the kind of doctor he was. So my point is this: in today's world, these doctors, they're indoctrinated. They're not educated. They're recruited not for their ability to think and be intelligent. They're recruited for their ability to be rote memorizers. They can memorize, procedure protocol really well. That doesn't lend toward great thinkers. That doesn't lend toward great discoveries and great major breakthroughs. It's not to say that there aren't wonderful doctors out there. That's not to say that all doctors are bad. I know a lot of wonderful medical docs that are doing it right, but I know a lot of them, just like you just said, that are very cultish. They're very kind of minimalist attitude. Like they have this attitude that if you don't trust me and you don't believe me and I don't have to prove anything that I'm saying to you, then I'm going to fire you as a patient. And that's wrong. That's not healthcare. That's a dictatorship. Dr. Osborne, I also wanted to ask you, you said that the government outlawed cereal in 1949, was it? 43. 1943, but also it was the government that gave us that food pyramid, you remember? Mm-hmm. With 11 servings of grain on the bottom. And that was in the 70s, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So why the big turnaround? The big turnaround in the government was it got in bed with industry after World War II. Really even before then. If you look at just look at the history of the Great Depression and what happened, so you have to, I don't know if you know the history of the Great Depression, but during the Great Depression, the government subsidized farmers to grow grain. They subsidized it. So they took aside taxpayer dollars to keep farmers growing crops because farmers were going out of business and banks were foreclosing on their land.
And so the government subsidized that, but they didn't subsidize it until most small farmers went out of business. What they really did, it was a land grab, is they didn't really subsidize anything for the small farmer. They subsidized it for the bigger landowners and the bigger people, so that now those subsidies today, we're paying them to Monsanto. Like, we're paying the criminals to grow our food with poison. And those subsidies haven't changed. So the government has always, I mean, look, I don't think the government is 100% malicious. I think they try to do things right. I don't know. The way I look at it is when I was taking my oldest son to college for the first time, he this is in Austin, Texas. So if any of your listeners are familiar with Austin, Texas, they're a very liberal kind of community, and they have a lot of vagrant bums. I don't call them bums because that's what they're drug users who don't have homes, and they're not the homeless, because if they got help and got care, they wouldn't have to live that way. And I do believe in charity, but what I don't believe in empowering somebody to continue to be a drug abuser. So my son's intuition and attitude was, let's help this guy out and just give him some money. And that's where a lot of people are in the government, is they think money solves problems, right? But money doesn't solve problems, right? What solves problems is love, right? And so you ask yourself, if we're talking about that guy in the street who has no home and is on drugs, that $5 bill is not a form of love. It's a form of, I'm going to feel better about myself by saying I helped a guy today, but you didn't really help that person. You enabled them to continue to buy drugs and to continue to deteriorate their life. And the government does that a lot with our money. They steal our money through taxation. And then they say, we're going to be noble with that money, and we're going to indiscriminately pass it out to who we want to, in the guise of help, in the guise of saving the children, in the guise of saving, whatever it is, right? And so then they end up giving away our money. But again, money doesn't solve problems, and you can't keep throwing money at problems. You have to throw people at problems.
To that point, Dr. Osborne, I would say that it creates problems. And in healthcare specifically, in 1965, before the passing of Medicare and Medicaid, healthcare was $27 billion a year in the United States. So when the government got involved in this sector of providing free healthcare for the elderly, all of a sudden it started to grow geometrically. And by 95, it hit $1 trillion. So the more money they put into disease management, the more profitable disease management becomes. So inadvertently, they made chronic disease a profitable commodity. So the more money they spend, the more disease we have. And the only way the system is going to disappear is once it falls over a cliff from its own weight. I don't think anyone's going to be able to budget, in no politician and no mortal.
I agree. I think it's a beast of its own. It's got its own life now, and so to me, what caves the system is educating people. I remember, that same kind of analogy on that same trend. I remember 20 years ago when I first started talking about gluten, there were a few of us out there talking about it, but it was not a household word. And, I always say gluten used to be a whisper. Today it's a roar, right? Today, everybody in the world has heard about gluten and gluten free.
Well, you go into restaurants and you have the gluten free menu. I mean, that's a miracle right there.
And functional medicine today is a whisper. 20 years from now, it will be a roar, and it will be the death roar, in my opinion, of medicine, unless functional medicine is marginalized. And what my fear there is, the way it gets marginalized is you allow people into the profession that aren't qualified to be in it, and they water it down. And so it actually is no longer functional medicine, but it's more like green medicine, where you throw a little turmeric at some inflammation, but you still don't ask the fundamental question: why did they have inflammation in the first place?
Well, I think with the technology that we have coming out today, and with the interest that people are affluent, powerful people have in healthcare, I think a lot of things will shift, and the younger people are more interested in functional medicine and more proactive approaches. Like our grandparents, took what the doctor said as gospel, but my children aren't the same way. So I'm thinking that as technology evolves, and our ability to diagnose deficiencies and toxicity and show people evidence of what's happening within their body, and people's interest in this kind of proactive care, we can rebuild the relationship between doctors like you and people who want excellent care, like lifelong excellent care to make sure, like vitamin D, for example. I mean, this is a little bit off topic, but I think it's still in the same vein. Vitamin D, most people, as you know, are deficient in the United States. And to make sure you have enough vitamin D doesn't take a lot, but 75% chance of developing colon cancer by being vitamin D deficient for years and decades. Once you get that, that becomes a lot more problematic and a lot more difficult to treat. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to get you to vitamin D to the level where it does the best good.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't take a rocket scientist. It just takes people waking up. Even with COVID, I mean, that's the topic on everybody's mind nowadays, right? 9 out of 10 of those deaths could be prevented by adequate vitamin D. That was studied very early on.
Nobody mentioned that.
I did.
I don't want to say nobody.
Got me investigated by the powers that be, and it got me stirred. And New York Post wrote a piece on me that the title of their article was "Doctor Recommends Lethal Doses of Vitamins." And so I was just recommending high dose vitamin therapy for 3 days, and they called that lethal dose recommendation. And then Business Insider wrote the same piece. So like, that's the problem, is that, in today's world, when you try to speak truth, the censorship and the kind of aristocratic people that are up at the top already, very wealthy, making all the money, they don't want any competition. And so they try to squash that competition out as soon as they see it kind of manifesting. And vitamin D is competition to big medicine, because vitamin D deficiency can cause autoimmune disease. It can cause high blood pressure. It can cause high blood sugar. It can cause cancer. I mean, it's a big deal. And it's a vitamin, and you can't patent it. So there's no patent rights or no patent money. And so anybody can come out with a formulary of vitamin D and sell it and try to earn an income. But in that case, the pharmaceutical companies don't get a patent, and they can't get exclusivity for 7 years to make billions of dollars, robbing people blind on a product that's actually hurting them in the guise of helping them.
Well, you'll be happy to know I take my lethal dose of vitamin D every day. So.
It's good to see it's working.
Very good. So let's talk a little bit about your upcoming event, Glutenology, and what that's about, and what the focus is going to be, and how different it's going to be from this conversation.
Yeah, so Glutenology is kind of a passion project for me. It's 21 years in the making. It's the culmination of anything you ever wanted to know about gluten and more, the history of grains and everything. It goes into the psychology of the diet change. It goes into the science behind what you need to learn and understand about nutrition around gluten sensitivity. It goes into travel and, how to navigate people and how to navigate holidays. I mean, it just goes anything you ever imagined you thought you could ask about gluten. It's 14 hours of in-depth classes on gluten sensitivity, and it's free. It's part of our mission is to give it away. We want people to know. We want people to know that, 46 million people with autoimmune disease. We want them to have information to access this information, because we believe it will save lives. And our mission, my motto, my kind of, if you will, my big why in the world is to save 100 million lives. And this is just part of that mission. So if you think at all that you might be gluten sensitive, if you've ever wondered, I wonder if the gluten-free diet is right for me. If you're struggling with autoimmune disease and you've been told you need medicine for the rest of your life and that there's no known reason why you have that autoimmune disease, this is a class for you. You need to watch it. It might just enlighten you, and it might very well save your life, because the average person that develops one autoimmune disease will go on to develop 7 autoimmune diseases in your lifetime. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's the top cause of death if we combine them all together. So it might save your life. And that's what I want people to know, is that the power of diet change very much is about life and death.
Well, that's awesome, Dr. Osborne. I'm going to send an email blast with the link to the event, and people just need to register. And
that's all they got to do is register. The event is September 15th through the 19th. We're going to have some live Q&As during the event. So, I'm an open book. Bring me your toughest questions. Bring me
This is all you by yourself, or you have other people?
No, I mean, this is me. We have a couple of special guest interviews. I have a special interview and conversation with Tom O'Brien, who you may know. Tom O'Brien is another one of the experts in gluten sensitivity. And then we have some other things that we're giving away with it. We're giving away a 26-hour nutritional library crash course So if you don't feel like you know enough about vitamins and minerals, that's actually a bonus that we're giving away for anyone who registers for the class.
And it could be anyone, or it should be medical professionals, or just
either, because I talk in a language. When I teach, I talk in a language that's both biochemical but also easy to understand. So you could be a medical professional and walk away with a higher education, or you could be a layperson just wanting to know more to empower yourself, and you're still going to walk away with, with pearls of knowledge that you can apply.
I love your passion, and even though you don't want any power, you still got lots of power. And the way you delivered it here is amazing, but the way you delivered it in person was just it was just like an incredible experience to be around you on the stage in front of people. It was awesome.
Well, I loved being there. I love New York. I love to visit. I wish I could visit it again someday soon, right?
One day soon. So far, they're closing down hotels and restaurants, and who knows what's the city going to look like once they finally open everything up.
Oh my.
The way they should. Well, Dr. Osborne, I want to thank you so much for your passion, for your willingness to share this information, for your dedication to studying this information, doing all that research. I really appreciate all your work and your love of humanity, and whatever drives you to do it. I'm grateful to you for it.
Well, I'm grateful for you too. I mean, you bring together just a plethora of wonderful people and doctors and scientists, and I just appreciate you because you're part of it, man. We're part of the same team. We're part of the mission to help educate the world, empower the world to be a better place. I think ultimately relinquishing power is the key. Loving people to life is the key. It's the way out. And we don't win if we take away their power and try to control them, because at the end of the day, think about that. I don't want to control somebody else's choices. My own choices are hard enough, man. I mean, like, that's already the weight of the world. Why do I want to take on somebody else's problems? So educate them and let them take on their own problems with greater vigor and greater success.
That's what makes America great, land of the free and all that.
Yep.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Any final question? Anyone has anything they'd like to ask Dr. Osborne before I close this out? Anything? Anybody? Great. I think we covered it all. I think we did a great job. So, Dr. Osborne, I look forward to speaking with you again, and all the success in your course. And we'll talk again very soon.
All right, Alex. Have a great evening.